Welcome everyone to the Verity Lala podcast. I'm Meanjin and I'm here with the lovely Michelle. Where it's the Verity Lala podcast is here to discuss current issues about the literary world, and we're here to really just say what we mean and talk about important issues that we feel the literary world ignores out of fear or a whole host of other reasons. So how you going, Michelle?
Excellent. We've got a nice little show coming up all about Meanjin. There's been a lot of commentary around this. I've been reading quite a few articles and different responses, and most of the responses are that it's a real tragedy. So just a little background: the board of Melbourne University Press, who now run Meanjin, announced that after 85 years the journal would close, and they cited purely financial reasons. However, most people, especially in the literary community, didn't believe this, and I can sort of understand why in a sense, because it was quite sudden. Like, they didn't really go about it in a very nice way. They just suddenly told they had two editors, Esther Anatolitis, sorry if I mispronounced that, and deputy editor Ellie McLean, and basically they sent them emails and said that's it, we're closing down, and everyone was locked out of everything, and there wasn't really any other explanation. And people assume probably non-disclosure agreements may have been had to been signed, and so it kind of happened really quickly and without much explanation, which always, when there's a vacuum, it's always going to make people, think that there's something nefarious going on. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, all the different explanations people have come up with. But basically the Roderick Centre for Australian Literature even offered to buy the journal, or to take over the running of the journal, and they said no. MUP said no, the journal is not for sale. So it definitely seems to be the end of the road for Meanjin, and in quite a dramatic and sudden way.
Yeah, that's true. Look, I'm sort of like laughing a bit, not because it's hard for me to take the woke mob seriously, and it's hard for me to take their complaints serious, because quite often what they're saying is just completely nonsensical. So I read some woke person saying the journal was taken down because of the journal was pro-Palestine.
Yes.
So when you hear that
media, yeah.
When you hear that, it's hard to take that kind of comment seriously, because it just sounds like a big old conspiracy where, like, you got to.
Yeah.
If all fails, you blame the Jews. If all fails,
yeah,
you blame them. It's all,
Yeah, I saw quite a few people on social media say that, and I know that they said the MUP board chair, Professor Warren Bebbington, he denied that, and there's been no proof about that. But of course, that doesn't stop people saying it. Someone said, "Oh, someone on the board of MUP is Jewish," and this and that. That must mean the Jews done it. So that's probably par for the course in Australian literature at the moment. I've got this. There was the guy, Ellie McLean, who's the deputy editor, as I said. He wrote an article in Crikey recently, and it was quite sort of an angry article, which is fair enough. His job was ripped out from under him with little warning. Right. But anyway, it was just interesting what he said about that. He really leaned into that. He said, "I had started to feel over the last few months that the ever-watchful eye of the university panopticon was sooner or later going to cast its gaze on our publishing activities due to the swiftness and force with which the university dealt with its students and staff protesting the institution's complicity in Palestinian genocide." So it's my dog trying to break into the room. Hopefully he won't succeed. What has been suggested strongly and consistently by the public outcry to this decision is that Meanjin had fallen afoul of the kinds of Zionist lobby groups that hounded the Bendigo Writers' Festival, and our comrades at Overland and every other publication or organisation that dared to express tangible support for the Palestinian people over the last 2 years. Oh, stop. Now, I think that kind of I mean, that's quite hyperbolic to start with. I also think to think that Meanjin is maybe I have to stop this dog. Hang on.
Oh.
So yeah, that was really interesting what Ellie McLean said in Crikey. And what it made me think is that he and others, especially from a lot of the social media sort of response, for example, you know, good old Claire Coleman said that it was disgusting and an act of cultural vandalism of the highest order. And there was a lot of like, you know, oh, it's devastating, this and that. So most people were pretty upset. And I just sort of thought, okay, so Ellie and many others really do see Meanjin as a really cutting-edge journal, anti-fascist, really pushing back at what they see as the wrong sort of politics, and they see themselves as punching up and the underdogs. And I was thinking we could discuss, you know, is that the case? Is that who they are? And what sort of writing have they been publishing?
I mean, yeah, I mean, we know that Meanjin, amongst pretty much all Australian literary journals, have been publishing one type of essay, poetry, poem, one type of creative piece that has a particular kind of narrative, which is the woke narrative, the anti-Australian narrative, the anti-West, the, you know, post-colonial stuff, the gender critical, you know, gender theory stuff, just the same old stuff. We all see it. This the race, gender, sexuality, you know, pieces. It's just it's almost really, it's really boring, and we all know it's really boring. It's anti-enlightenment from my perspective. It's just, you know, you're not allowed to criticize this or even critically engage this overarching narrative. It's postmodernist. It's all of that. What these people seem to do is they seem to borrow one, you know, a word that they love to use, gaslight the rest of us into thinking that's not what's actually going on. You know.
It's interesting. I agree with you, Megan. Like, I think that Meanjin didn't start as that. Like, it has published it's got a long history. So it was founded in 1940, and it definitely the idea behind it was a lot of publication then was either coming out of like Britain, so it was all very hoity-toity in English, or it was coming out of universities, and there wasn't a lot of sort of grassroots anti-academic publication, and very Australian, like an Australian thing. Everyone was still trying to be, you know, to be English and sophisticated, and they thought that being Australian wasn't cutting it. So Meanjin did start, that's why it's called Meanjin. It chose an Indigenous word, and it tried to do something that was more homegrown. So I think, and it did publish some really great writers throughout its history, absolutely. I think probably in the last 10 years is, in my opinion, when it's started to go downhill. And I don't mean to disparage people who publish in Meanjin. Of course, there are individual pieces in there to this day, which are fabulous. But I do think that generally they became more and more focused on just publishing whatever sort of fits in with a particular ideology, you know, rather than just choose good work from across the spectrum. You know, I know a lot of people who just know they would just never get published in Meanjin because they're not in the cool club, right?
Yes, and they don't fit the right identity, and they don't then they don't write about the things that are, like you said, that are current, and that their culture, the literary culture, is wanting to produce.
Yeah, that's right. I came across a really interesting article on Substack by a South Australian writer I haven't actually heard of before, but I'm going to look into him more. His name is Matthew Sinai, and he wrote about Meanjin's closing, but he had a very different perspective, probably more in line with what you and I would think. And he accuses them of Meanjin the last 10 years, of going with what's current and political rather than lasting artistic quality. So he says, something happened in the 2010s. It happened to Meanjin, and it happened to literary journals in Australia and all across the world too. Go to the Meanjin website right now and peruse the table of contents for the recent issues. As a rule, there are about 4 short stories each issue. 4. Once the crucible for Australian myth-making, now the journal seems unwilling to make substantial creative additions to the nation's culture. And while there is plenty of poetry, much of it is the haranguing type that may as well be a lecture. The current thing mode rules. The political expressions of current thing writing are not solely leftist. Many right-wing publications are exasperatingly discourse-heavy also, but most literary journals are publicly funded institutions, and publicly funded institutions lean left. What this means is that the current thing writing in these places is always of a particular rhetorical flavour. To Meanjin's credit, it has published writers across the political spectrum, but generally its politics are unsurprisingly, boringly progressive. So I think that that really summed it up from how I feel Meanjin has gone in the last 10 years, definitely. You open it up and you're not going to get your beliefs challenged necessarily. You're going to be fed a set of leftist beliefs, which is fine, but if there was also centrist beliefs and right-wing beliefs, that would be great. And it has really skewed very into the non-fiction, into the personal essay and opinion piece, rather than really supporting a lot of, as you said, fiction and poetry that isn't politically and identity based.
Yeah. And you always at least the literary journals in general in Australia, but even with Meanjin, you just the reader is it's almost like the reader has to go through this kind of lashing. You got to feel bad. You got to they have to feel ashamed. It's like the writers are trying to make the reader feel ashamed of themselves. And who wants to read that?
Yes, that's a good point, Morgan. Yeah, you do. You have to get it. You have to be slapped about the head for not, being the right gender or sex or color or whatever. Yeah, that's so true. It was funny because this guy, the deputy editor, he had another little rant, which I thought was really funny. Like it made me realize they really do see themselves as the underdog, even though they get huge amounts of funding, which we can talk about in a minute. And so this was his little rant, another part of his rant. He said, Meanjin was always intended to be a publication that mounted considerable resistance to fascist threat. This is Ellie McLean. Every day, the pernicious forces of capital find new ways to align themselves against the interests of creative people, of working people. This makes me laugh. Every day, another person wishing to carve out a life or at least a consistent hobby for themselves in the arts is met with the stop. I can't not do it. Is met with the crushing reminder that there are people, completely arbitrary people, who really should have no stake whatsoever in these matters, who can and will control their creative means of production. Working in publishing now, for the majority of workers who aren't lucky enough to control their own output, has nothing to do with publishing good writing and everything to do with following orders. I think that's quite ironic, that last sentence.
Oh, these people take themselves way too seriously. But they're like cosplaying.
Yeah.
To me, these people are cosplaying. They're like, in their head, they have this fantasy of this being a victim but a superhero, and it comes out in the strange things they say. Like, you just hearing that, it's, to me, this person's in an alternate reality. This person's actually not in reality.
That's what I think too. It's like they don't realize they are the establishment now, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
They are the gatekeepers. They have had cultural ascendance for the last 10 to 15 years, and they are the new gatekeepers. They think they're doing something really edgy and pushing back, but they're just going with the flow of the most progressive beliefs. But the progressive beliefs, as you say, no one loses anything from holding them. It's a kind of a play acting of being, you know, of being progressive, which gives them cultural capital and cachet, you know.
Yeah. And also, if they don't keep this up, because if they do acknowledge they are the gatekeepers, then like that, they can't ask for anything else. They've got to keep up this run, this race. They've got to keep up this like this false narrative about them being, you know, downtrodden and, you know,
yes,
the little guy who's fighting for, you know, to have his voice or to have a voice. And, you know, they've got to keep this up because that's their stick. That's their thing.
Yes, they're actually like, I mean, most of the people in literary arts are at least middle class upwards, more upper middle class, university educated. It just giving me good, what's her name? Greta Thunberg vibes, cosplaying on her first like she's been, you know, held as it's cosplaying being held as a captive and all this sort of stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, I feel like, you know, it's just now the thing to say, that you are the oppressed one and you must find a way to say it. And then, as you say, that's your badge of honor, and then you're allowed to speak, and then you're allowed to publish, and then you're allowed to say who else gets to speak and who else gets to publish.
Right. And on top of that, they get to sound them being morally superior at the same time. So it's like, you know, they've hit this gold mine. Like, you know, they are the elites, they are the gatekeepers, but on top of that, they get this moral superiority. You know, around and just, you know, they're superior morally. So it's there's a lot of psychology that's going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of psychology going on, but it was interesting. I think we both read the same article, which was The Emotional Gatekeeper by Scott Davies. So I'll link all these articles afterwards. People can read themselves. It was a great article, and he was sort of saying that what used to be called the avant-garde of the middle class distinguished themselves from the boring old bourgeoisie by saying that they were doing edgy and unconventional things and producing novel work and all this sort of stuff. But really, that has become the novel work has become very mainstream now. And when you repeat the same sort of story 100 times and the same sort of article and the same opinion unchallenged 1,000 times, it becomes a little bit boring. And I think your right to call yourself the anti-fascists is starting to dwindle.
It is. And but then what's so the literary world keeps on just doing what about this, saying what about, you know, it's just, you know, everyone's secretly frustrated. There's a lot of people in the literary world who are secretly frustrated, but nothing seems to change. Nothing seems to, you know, the same narrative keeps getting spun again and again and again in the same way. And it's just, I don't know, man. It's getting too ridiculous. I mean, Meanjin falling it's. What do you expect when you, from my perspective, you just promote just things that you can't even, like, it's authoritarian, like authoritarian writers who want to control people's stories, who want to control the narrative, who want to control what you as the reader think, you know, because they write in such a way where to even questioning your head makes you think you're a bad person, makes you feel like you're a bad person. It's like, you know, they write in that way.
Yeah, and that's what Scott Davies in this article was referring to as the new sort of mode of gatekeeping. So often when we're talking about woke, and we talk about it specifically in Australian literature, we talk about more sort of the subjects of woke. So, you know, gender, identity, politics, race, this and that, the subjects that wokery is sort of obsessed with and constantly recycles. In this article, it's really interesting because he talks about the mode that they use for debate and discourse, which is another aspect of woke. So rather than go with a sort of logical, you know, debate and keeping an open mind to other people's points of view and so forth, it's all very emotional, hyperbolic, and very based in subtly manipulating people into feeling that they are a bad person if they don't feel the same way about political ideologies as they do. So it's emotionally kind of, the affect is very high, the logic is quite low, and a lot of the rhetoric around Meanjin kind of reflected that, in sense that people were like, oh, this is terrible, terrible. But let's just, I think we need to have a clear-headed look. Okay, why is this happening? Perhaps journals like Meanjin are not representing Australia and Australian writers, because I certainly didn't feel like I was part of that scene. I know so many writers behind the scene who say they wouldn't even bother sending work to them, not because they wouldn't want to be published in there, but because they just feel they wouldn't be considered, right? They weren't part of the right ideological ideas. So was it really such a loss? It was a loss to a very elite group of people who all hold pretty much the same attitudes, but it doesn't feel like a loss to me. And I'm sorry for the loss to other authors who have lost publishing opportunities. That's always a bad thing. But the journal was getting quite a lot of funding, as a lot of similar journals do. So I had a look at the figures. Where did I get this from? This was from an essay that Katrina Menzies-Pike wrote in Crikey, and she says, the University of Melbourne has subsidised the publication of Meanjin since 1945, directly at first and more recently via Melbourne University Press. The publisher is a registered charity. In these reports, we learn that the university's financial support of Meanjin jumped from $120,000 in 2019 to $220,000 in 2020. In 2024, it contributed $220,000 to Meanjin's operating costs and $1 million to MUP. So I think at the moment, Meanjin hadn't succeeded in the last couple of years in getting creative, as well as that funding, getting Creative Australia funding, which it had in the past. But a lot of the similar journals like Overland and stuff, they get pretty good funding. So Overland received $99,000 in late 2024. Wesley receives $86,000. Australian Book Review $720,000. Although I would argue they produce a lot of better work. So, these are not journals that are running like us on nothing or very tiny bits of funding. So they should be able to, if they're getting especially taxpayer funding, they should be servicing the whole community, not just their little corner of it. Exactly. That's my feeling, and disenfranchising a lot of the other voices who aren't in with the crowd or down with the same beliefs that they're down with. So, okay, the funding, they've got funding for many, many years. Maybe in the last 10 years, they've been misusing it somewhat to just push a social justice agenda rather than just publish the best work that comes their way.
Exactly. But also my thing is, the downfall of Meanjin was inevitable, because how can you service a community? How can you service Australian literature when you're undermining what it means to be Australian? Makes no sense. Of course, it's gonna fall if you're publishing pieces that attack what it means to be Australian. Or Australian values, or Western values. Of course, it's gonna fall. I just, it's, again, the logic is low, the emotion is very, very high.
And I just think it's passing themselves off as the underdogs, the working class, or this and that. I'm sorry, that just does not ring true to the sort of work that Meanjin has been publishing in the last 10 or 15 years. They are pushing very elitist beliefs, which if you ran them past most Australians, they wouldn't really be on board with them, and that's okay. We're in a democracy, everyone thinks differently, but to think that they are the underdogs and they are representing the working class, no, they're representing a very niche group of very well educated and in most cases quite well off group of people. And hey, listen, I know it's hard to make money in the arts, and you know what, most of us, unlike Ellie McLean, don't get a paid job in the arts. We do other jobs in normal hours, and then we squeeze in our artistic pursuits around the corners. And I'm not saying that's the best way for it to be, but that's the reality. So for him to be sort of like, oh no, well, my creative means of production is being squashed, it's like, well, sorry, so is everybody else's. Okay.
Oh, that's good. We should get a t-shirt that's with that quote, because it's going to be one of the best quotes ever. You know what? He sounds like a cartoon. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. I don't personally. I also have to do a what do you call it? Anyway, I basically have to say I've got a bit of a vested interest, but not really, because I'm not a person who would let this get in the way. But I think it's a funny story. I have my own little history with Meanjin. So does Verity Laugh. So when the cancellation happening in 2020, and then the lovely Eileen Chong published a article in Meanjin under the editorship of Jonathan Green, and they just published this absolute screed. It was like she basically got all the defamatory tweets that she'd made about me, or just negative tweets about the journal or whatever, and she put them into, sort of collated them into an article called Misrepresentations. Meanjin published this. It was full of lies, number one. It was just basically a whole load of tweets, number two. And it was just a platform for Eileen to do her social justice warrior performance, on their journal. They never contacted me. They never questioned if any of it was true. They just published it because it went with their agenda, right? The terrible white racist woman, the white racist journal, blah, blah, blah. So I emailed Jonathan Green, and I asked him if, and I said, there are lies in here. This is defamatory material. I said, I don't wish to you to take it down. I said, but I would like a right of reply. And he said, no, we won't be doing that. I went, okay. And there was so much going on at that time, I just left it. I then wrote at some stage to the head of MUP, who was Nathan Hollier at the time, and asked him if he would do anything about it. And he didn't really do anything about it either, so I left it. And then suddenly, 6 months later, once I had finally had enough of Eileen spreading a whole lot of lies about me, and had help through Arts Law to write a letter to her asking her to cease and desist, basically. I'm assuming it was in response to that, but I didn't ask for the thing to be taken down. I went back to check on it one day because someone said, oh, can you send me that article? And I went to find it, and it was gone. It had disappeared. So I wrote Jonathan Green and I said, oh, the article's disappeared. What's happened? He just wouldn't tell me. He's just well, that's interesting. Okay, so when I didn't want it up there or wanted to write a reply, I got a no. And so this is my sort of personal experience with them. And so it was just, I just came up against an ideological brick wall, basically, where they weren't willing to listen to anybody else's side of things. They weren't willing to follow logic. They didn't at that stage care if they were publishing something that was full of lies, because it fit their ideological agenda at that time. And only later, when they were worried about defamation, I suppose, they suddenly disappeared the article. So, that says a lot about the journal to me anyway.
Yes, and that's what goes on in the literary arts, literary scene. That's what I think people need to know. This is what goes on, A lot of times there's one face for the public and then one face behind the scenes. What's actually really going on. I mean, that's a classic example,
Yeah. It was an eye opener for me. I was really, because being an editor of Verity La, the managing editor at that time, I was writing as the head of one journal to the head of another journal, thinking he would at least take me seriously or give me a right of reply or something. I mean, that's definitely something that I would have done if someone had written to me and said, listen, you've just published a hit piece on me full of lies. I'd like the right of reply. But it wasn't even considered. It wasn't even in their realm to expose their readers to an alternative point of view, or dare I say, to the truth. So yeah, interesting. So yeah, that was fun. So it was nice to discover this Matthew. I liked what he said. There was another guy I discovered when I clicked through on a link from his thing. It was another guy called hang on, now I've lost him. What did he say? He basically was less nice about it. Hang on, you talk for a minute. I'll try and find it, Morgan.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, like it one of the things I liked that he said in the article was, the trade-off that the writers have made for, being current, relevant, in the moment versus having longevity. And to me, that speaks to what this culture we're speaking out against produces. It produces things of the moment that lacks meat, substance. Like the writing lacks substance, the writing lacks meat, and dare I say objectivity. And it's, again, emotions very high, manipulation is very high, logic, craft is low and less important. It's more important more important your point of view, and the craft is not really that important because
that's true. A lot of the work, and once again, not all of it. I know there'll be people listening who publish in Meanjin, and it's no personal slight on anybody's work, because I haven't gone through and read everybody's work. I'm sure there's lots of fabulous work on there, but I just think generally when work is driven by a political or social justice agenda, it's usually pretty flat, because it's a vehicle rather than being a creation in itself, which is complex and multifaceted. It's a vehicle for a message, and that's my least favorite type of writing.
Right. And they've created a culture where the writer is unable to separate themselves from the actual writing. So, like, regardless of whatever I write, for this culture, for the current, the way things are in the literary scene, me being black has everything to do with what I'm writing. Even if I'm writing about a laptop, even if I'm writing about a laptop, somehow me being black is infused in there somehow. It's just, I can't escape that. And vice versa for someone who's white. So like, a white writer cannot escape their quote unquote racism, even if they're writing about a bottle of water. Somehow their whiteness is infused in that, because it's just this thing that they're always carrying.
That's a really good point. It's not even so much an ideology as a whole, like, sense of, like, just the whole thing is infused with identity politics, so much that it's just a given that is the way to see things. That is the appropriate lens to view the whole world through and to write through, and it cannot even be separated out anymore. It's become so, like, prevalent and pervasive.
Not only is it inappropriate to not view it that way, it's the only way to view the world. It's the only way, which again, it's ironic because they try to destroy big narratives, meta narratives. They create big narratives themselves.
Listen, they basically, this is why I found Ellie McLean's piece so amusing and slightly frustrating. There was no awareness there that as someone who has a paid job as an editor of a journal, which is getting hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of funding, and that is, you are the gatekeeper now. Like, drop the punching up language. You are, and you are. There's always going to be gatekeepers. We're editors of a journal, Verity Lala. So we're gatekeepers. That's the point. If somebody wants to come into and publish in a journal, you do go through a process of being chosen, right? Or being chosen by commission. So there you can't get away from the idea of gatekeeping. But I suppose the idea is that you try and do it as impartially as you can, with an eye just to like the best work. And not reading the bio first and worrying about the identities and worrying about, which boxes you're ticking. And I think this is another thing with literary journals, which is a huge thing, is that editors know because they really rely. I mean, there was a whole lot of stuff about like, oh, how ridiculous that they said it wasn't financially viable. Of course, it's not financially viable. No journal is financially viable. And that's true, right? But most journals are very reliant on funding, and funding at the moment is given very much in preference to people who are supporting Indigenous writing, writing from all people with different genders, writing from people with different cultural backgrounds and so forth. I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with that. I think that just often the way, well, it's been abused by a lot of people. I think that especially when editors now are looking to accept work, they definitely have one eye on like, okay, that's going to look great for when I put in my funding application because I've supported X, Y, Z and everything else, right? So, it's financially motivated as well as ideological.
And why haven't these funding bodies examined the if this actual method works? So are they producing say writers of color who are good writers? Are they or is it, why is it the same people, the same group keep other gatekeepers? What's going on there? Why are they speaking for an entire culture? Why haven't they looked into that? What's going on? What's going on there?
The same faces and names keep popping up as representatives of particular groups. They've sort of risen to the top of being the representative of the people of color or the trans people or the whatever, or in the disability community. There's a few key figures in there of writers who've risen up. And don't tell me they're not. I've heard a lot of horror stories of people in those unofficial positions as the poster people for particular identities who kick quite ruthlessly down on the other people in their own community who are trying to get a little sniff of some of those opportunities, rather than, they make a lot of noise about, more representation for people of color or disabled people, whatever. But then they ruthlessly stop those other people from getting any of that representation. They take the lion's share for themselves. That's why we see the same faces over and over again.
Exactly. And why haven't these funding bodies asked, well, hold on, why are you the representative? Who elected you? How did you come to be the representative of your entire community? How does that work? Did you have an election? How does it work? Why aren't they asking these questions? Because it's, and more often than not, there's people who claim to be speaking for their group. They're often on the fringe of their own cultures. They often do not speak. They actually do not speak for their culture. They don't. And that's why I don't get. It's like, what did Einstein say? Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and again and expecting a different result. And this is, I feel like that quote, I think that quote summarizes the literary scene in general.
Yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? It's like the things that everyone's focusing on change slightly over time, whatever woke ideology focuses on seems to shift from this, from this particular topic to that one. But the methods stay the same, and the general outlook, and the sense of like the power and oppression and the whole lens you have to look through stays the same. And just different people use that as a sort of a way to push themselves up the greasy pole, basically, and have their time in the sun, and then the next thing comes around. It does get quite boring. And I would also like to see funding bodies look not just at the identities and of the people, and the opportunities that literary journals are giving to people, but the quality of the work that is published as well. These are peer assessors who are supposed to be capable of evaluating the quality of fiction, non-fiction, poetry, and so forth. So, it's not enough that somebody is just publishing stuff that is from a diverse range of writers. I think that the attitudes and the opinions expressed and have to be diverse, genuinely diverse as well, ideologically, politically, and also just the work has to be, it's important that the quality of the work is there no matter who is writing.
That's exactly it. It has to. It has to. And this is a scary word for the literary scene, at the moment. But we've got to have a standard. It has to be an objective standard that we measure. Work against. Otherwise, it's just I know there's a level of subjectivity when it comes to obviously anything creative. But there has to be a standard in which we decide this is good or this is not. This isn't. This is a good piece. This isn't a good piece.
Yeah.
That conversation needs to start. It needs to happen again because they've destroyed that. They've made that conversation taboo.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That is a taboo conversation now. Yeah. So the other writer I saw on Substack who was writing about this, he's another Australian writer. I thought he had a bit more of a sort of a spicy take, but it was quite funny. He said the Australian literary establishment essentially exists for the purpose of controlling who does and doesn't get promoted to the public. It exists to make sure that only the right people with the correct opinions will ever get publishing deals, critical praise, and win awards. They are gatekeepers and they are very good at it, hence the dismal state of Australian literature. That was Lewis Woolston, a South Australian writer. So I thought that was quite funny. Yeah, once again, just saying, that this is the death of a journal that I think the death of any literary journal is sad in the sense that if that funding was going to be sort of, if Meanjin was going to go down, that funding that was already being given to it was going to be repurposed into starting a fresh journal.
Yes.
That could be a really great outcome.
Yes.
I don't think that the world's worse off, better off because Meanjin has disappeared. I wouldn't go that far, but I think that for them to close down and for something that was more actually inclusive of different types of people, different types of work, and good quality work would be a win, definitely.
Yeah. But we've got to get back to we have to have that conversation about what is good writing. If the industry doesn't have that conversation, then it's not going to happen. We need to break through this taboo of not being allowed to have that conversation of what is a good writer and what isn't a good writer. That needs to happen.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe if a new journal was started, I suppose this is what we're trying to do on Verity La, and we're doing it with absolutely zero funds at the moment. So if someone gave us $100,000, woohoo, watch us go. It would be to see a new journal such as us or some other journal given some sort of startup funding like that and do something that is really something new. I know that Meanjin and Overland, I think they're doing something new, but to me, they're just, as you say, rinse and repeat the same ideas, the same types of stories over and over and over. okay, that is getting pretty boring. It would be great to see that funding go to somewhere else, and people to establish a platform like we're trying to establish, where you publish purposely discordant views on the same platform, and you have them in conversation with each other, and they're both well written, and people have got their ears open to both sides of arguments, as well as publish writers at the moment who, because they don't fit a particular identity profile, are finding it hard to get published, but whose work is great, and you open it up. I would love to see a literary journal like that get that funding.
And that readers and writers are both allowed to have, freedom of association and freedom to agree and disagree, to like this piece and to not like this piece. There, to have that freedom, and is crucial. It's absolutely crucial.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Martin, because that's another real aspect of it, that it's not just about, we'll only publish a work that expresses a sort of a set of opinions that's within these bounds, the right sort of opinions. But it's also, you have to be the right sort of person yourself. And you're not only that, but you have to associate with the right sort of people. Otherwise, just liking the wrong tweets or supporting the wrong person can be enough to get you ousted and get your name ousted, so that you wouldn't be considered work again.
Right. And to me, the good literary journal doesn't punish its writers and readers for the stuff they think, say, or believe outside of being published. Like what a writer says and says outside, or thinks and believes outside of getting published at Very Live, for example, is their choice and their freedom to do so. So that also needs to be emphasized. That really does, because a lot of writers feel like, okay, now I'm published with this journal, I can't say X, Y, Z, or saying this publicly, because I'll lose this opportunity that I have, or this relationship that I have with this journal, or whatever it is. But that's to me so illiberal. It's so illiberal. And just
it really is. I saw an example of that. Sort of, remember with Christos Tsiolkas, the Melbourne writer, and he's very well established. He's a great writer, and he recently did the Melbourne launch for Ruptured, which is a anthology of Australian Jewish women's writers, essays, about the October the 7th and the effect that's had on their lives. So he gave a speech which was published somewhere. It was a very sort of middle of the road speech, recognizing all the things, recognizing terrible things are happening in Palestine, but also then saying, but these Jewish women have the right to say their experience, blah blah. Do you think you could get away with that? There was this huge pile-on of this guy, and I can't remember. I just saw someone in the Australian literary scene wrote an article about how they used to like him, but now they can just see he's this terrible person and blah blah. All because he stood there and made a very milquetoast speech about the suffering on all sides, and that was enough to basically get him booted, in the minds of many people from. So once again, about freedom of association, as you said, everyone's talking on social media about his work. I always knew he was a bit iffy, and that book slap was a bit on the nose. He's a misogynist, and
Of course. The moment you slightly veer off from the narrative, you've always been this evil person. You've always, I knew it. They're so boring. They're so boring with their with their reactions. It's just like, like bots.
Yes, they are like bots. Yes. Yeah. I think. Well, I suppose. Listen, thinking for yourself is punishable by being outcast, by exile, right? So most people are too scared of exile, or too weak, or don't wish to go there. It's not worth it for them, whatever. So they say the things they're supposed to say, or they stay quiet.
I'm curious to know what his response was to that.
Yeah, he didn't really respond, to be honest. He just kind of sat that one out. There was a whole lot of, and which is probably the best thing to do. Like if you sort of say anything back, then that gives fuel to the fire, I think. So luckily for him, you know, he's an established enough writer that it's not really going to do any, you know, any great damage to him. And people who I know who know him say he's the most lovely man, and like to say things like that. If you knew the man, it's like outrageous. But
that's the thing. Sorry, I don't mean cut you off, but that's the thing. They automatically make it personal. They automatically make it about him versus what he said.
Yeah.
Or the conversation becomes then him as a person, and that's how they get people. You know?
Yeah, it's the reputational takedown. Yeah. I really experienced that firsthand with the Verity Last stuff, and because it was my first rodeo, I didn't really understand it was just part of the mechanism. It's like a playbook. Like, first they say you've done this wrong thing or said this wrong thing, and then it quickly shifts from that to you. Like, as you said, that reveals your whole character, and then because then that's non-ending. Like if you've just done one wrong thing, and if you try and do the apology, then well, it's going to get worse anyway. It's sort of got an end point. Okay, the person did this wrong thing, and you either sort of forgive them for it or you don't. But whatever but it has to become a whole morality play around your whole character, because that's a never-ending thing they can mine. It's like you know, it's not just one thing you've done. It's you. It's your whole self, and that's much juicier.
Yes, it is. But I wish people like understood that when they do that, when they like make your character the focal point, because you've just slightly veered off the actual narrative. I wish people understood that's actually such a freeing moment, because you realize, oh, like there's nothing I can actually do to be good in your eyes. There's actually nothing I can do. So all right, fine.
That's such a point. It's very freeing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so freeing. It's like, oh, okay. And then you realize, hold on, it's actually not as threatening as they make it seem. It's not. And you wake up the next day and you're like, hold on, I've still got my fridge. My food is still in the fridge, and all right, I'm walking to Woolies and I'm shopping, and
and people in the world are still behaving normally, not like weird.
Right, it's still the same. You're like, wait, hold on, it's what? This whole thing was a lie.
Yeah, it does. It very much reminds me of like The Wizard of Oz. Have you watched the full movie and you get to the end and he's like the little man hiding behind all the smoke and mirrors, right? And he's trying to scare everyone. And then Dorothy's just like, oh, come on. And then he comes out and he's this tiny little short man. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. It feels like that. It feels like once you've got to the other side of that, it feels really scary going through that kind of wall and pulling aside that curtain, I should say. But once you've done so, it's really no big deal. So I wish more people would join us.
Yeah, I just think that, I wish that understand, like, just hold off just maybe 10 seconds from freaking out, right? Just 10 seconds and just have a look. Just have a look at your surroundings. Nothing's actually changed. And in saying that, for those who actually work in the industry and who like use, who pay their bills, the creative arts, that's a different story.
Yeah, true.
And they need like a different exit plan, in the same way that like anyone who's leaving a cult, you need to have your plan to exit. But for those of us who don't, earn money in the industry, and the threat is just exile, then it's like, well, if that's all it takes to be exiled, then I really didn't belong to begin with.
Yeah, that's so true.
And you also learn that these people are so fickle, because once this moment ends, and things flip, because you've seen J.K. Rowling responding to the girl in Harry Potter. What was her name? Was it
Emma Watson?
Yeah. So she's now backtracking after taking digs at her, after participating in the abuse that J.K. Rowling was experiencing. She's now recognizing that the tide is changing, and she's now backtracking.
Mm-hmm.
This is how fickle people are.
Yeah, that's right. Because in the UK, you know, things are changing. Like gender is probably one of their biggest, definitely in Scotland, you know, their biggest iteration of the woke sort of wars. And that definitely the tide is starting to go back on that. And I suppose Emma Watson feels that, and she doesn't want to be left marooned as having been someone who was too strident. But you know, I think. Anyway, I suppose we're all learning how to negotiate these waters. But the main thing I try and stick to is just personal integrity, you know, going back to your own values and not being scared. Like, don't be scared. It's okay. And maybe that's part of what that article by Steve Davies, he when he wrote about the mode that sort of woke ideology takes. It is designed to make you scared. Like, it is the very emotional, hyperbolic language that's used, and the purity spirals, the very black and white language, you're with us or against us. All this is supposed to get you really viscerally, like, in a panic mode, right? So that you feel rushed, and so that you sort of make decisions you wouldn't normally make with a cool head. So if people were discussing things in an old school way, where you listen to someone's point of view and then someone else, and everyone stayed pretty civil, and you weren't going to be exiled, if you spoke to the wrong person, you weren't going to be, you know, lent on to disavow them, and all those sort of shenanigans. Right. If that system wasn't in place, people would be free to express themselves, and they would be more likely to do so. But the system that's in place in Australian literature and other cultural, you know, centres is very much like that. So, you know, it activates your limbic system. You go into this fight or flight mode, and you know, I think it's really important, as you're saying, that don't buy into that. Step back. Take time to calm down, think for yourself, and if you're in a position to do so, speak up. You know, not everyone's in a position to do so for different reasons. People's mental health is more or less robust, people's living situations, their communities and things. But if you are in a position, then consider speaking up, because it's good for other people. It would be good for the Australian literary scene to have more conversations like this. But it's also just good for yourself personally. It's freeing, and I think it's got to be good for your creative output as well, Morgan. Your master's creative output will rise.
Right, you'll be able to control your means of production, you know.
It's true. Like, if you think of the great literature, I think a lot about, like, Dante and writing the Inferno or the Divine Comedy. I mean, he would not have written that if he had lurked around in Florence, you know, and just sort of endlessly bickered between all the different political parties and the infightings. He was known as a poet and a writer then, but he was diverted by all the infighting and the politics that was going on. Once he was exiled because he sort of backed the wrong team, and he was ousted from the city, and he had to live in the countryside on his own. That's when he got down to writing this incredible creative work. And there's been a long line of creatives who do that. They do their best work when they are exiled. And I think that most of the really great creators, if you think about it, often their work wasn't appreciated at the time because they were doing something different than everybody else, that no one else appreciated, right? And I don't think Meanjin's publishing, generally in the last 10 years, unfortunately, it stopped publishing that sort of work. It thought it was publishing progressive, wonderful stuff, but in my mind, it was just going with the flow of wokery.
It was a status quo. It was a status
quo. In the arts. It is the status quo in the arts,
Yeah, it's a status quo in the arts, posing as the alternative, the new, novel, fresh perspectives. But nothing about what they were publishing was fresh, was new, novel. None of it. You know. But they had and they had the opportunity to do so, to publish fresh new things, fresh new writing from different perspectives. They could continue publishing whatever they want, the woke stuff, but they could, publish actual fresh new ideas that make people think, where thinking is quite the craft is the point. I do also when I say they're also, because a lot of this is also psychological. There's a lot of psychology that's mixed into all of this, but for people who are caught up in this whole, fearing the consequences of the mob, one thing I always suggest is I think people need to, maybe there needs to be a program or something that people are taught. You don't let people tell you who you are, because you've lived in your body your entire life. You've lived your own experiences. It's your own. You know who you are. So don't let people tell you who you are, who don't know nothing about you, who haven't walked a foot in your life's journey. But to kind of counter the character assassination, because that's a big component of how the literary scene operates now.
Yeah, basically it's people trying to disempower other people, and usually
Yes.
for their own gain, take power from one and take it for themselves. So if I can disempower enough other people, then I can eventually sit on top of the pack, right? And I get to say who's in and who's out, and it has opportunities to your friends, and just, it's just, well, having seen the dark, and I know a lot of people listening to this, possibly a lot of people who are getting published in sort of Overland, and we're getting published in Meanjin and all those sort of things. I know they might think, oh gosh, you're seeing it through a very dark lens. That's not the experience I've had with these journals or with these people. And I do understand that, because the same was probably, I would have said the same thing up until I went through my cancellation. It's like you haven't hit until you actually kind of go where you shouldn't have gone, even inadvertently, in terms of saying something or whatever, or publishing something or writing something that's off on the nose for these people. You don't hit that wall, then you see the other side, then you see what's behind all that. As you say, there's a lot of machinations, there's a lot of dark psychology, there's a lot of manipulation, there's a lot of bullying, and there's just a lot of power play, because it's hard to get ahead in the arts, and that's how a lot of people choose to get ahead. So a lot of people who are just submitting their work wouldn't necessarily see that. Do you know what I mean? They would think, oh, what are you talking about, Michelle? You're a little bit over the top here. But I have seen those side of things, and I suppose once you have, you can't unsee it.
Well, I guess maybe those people would be the ones the kind of writers who just submit, are not really in the scene, or haven't really worked in the scene, I'm assuming. Because I personally, from my perspective, I can't. It's hard for me to understand how a writer who's in the industry is blind to all of what's going on. Very hard, because any space you enter in the literary world, it's anti-white male. That's always, and it makes me think, well, how can you not think, oh, this is a bit odd, what's going on here? Because it's all like, you enter the scene and you know exactly what you can and can't say off the jump. You know, and if you don't know, you'll learn very quickly what you can and can't say. So then that leads me to believe, I don't know how, this is a question that I have. It's hard for me to think that a writer who's in the industry is not aware of what's going on. It's just, because they can't, because they know you. They attack your psychology. It's a visceral experience. You feel it in your body, and you just know what you can and can't say, what you can and can't think, and
Yeah, it's hard to know, not being in other people's minds, like how they're experiencing that and perceiving it. I suppose there's a whole spectrum of experiences there. Some people would be very aware of it and would feel really suffocated, and other people might just be kind of la-la-ing along and not thinking too much about it. I don't know, but I agree with you that it's pretty hard not to hit up against it at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, even the stuff that's being published and the stuff that's being said about writing, the constant conversation about race, gender, sexuality, because that's and all the literary journals publishing the same stuff, the same kind of content, same kind of writing, same narrative. It's hard for me to even try to understand how someone could miss that. I guess I can intellectually, people are different and people see things differently, and there could be someone who misses that entirely, but it's hard for me to unless they're, like I said, unless they're the kind of writer who just submits pieces,
and just stays out
and is living in the industry. That kind of writer.
Maybe that's a wise way to be.
maybe. I don't know.
Oh, well. Anything else to add, Morgan? You got any other bees in the bonnet?
I think that's all. I mean, we've been over an hour now, so we should.
Well, if anybody at MUP would like to throw some money at Verity La,
yes, you're more than welcome. You're more than welcome.
We'll take $100,000 and we'll make some magic with it. Well, let's hope something does spring up in the place of Meanjin. One journal has gone down. I do agree. Louise Adler said something I agree with. Said institutions like Meanjin, and it is an institution, are easy to close down. Their replacements are much harder to create, and I think that's true. That's probably the only, in my mind, the biggest downside about this is it's the lack of one space. Will another open up in its place? That would be the ideal.
Yeah, but it's not looking good. I can't. I can't imagine in this climate and another big writing institution being opened up. Well, that would I can't imagine that happening really.
Well, maybe what I'm hoping is that there is broader community support. So, for example, for what we're trying to do at Verity La, because if there are a group of disenfranchised people and they are the majority, it would be great to see them throw their support behind other journals that did support a genuinely more diverse range of writers and writing. So, that would be nice to see.
It would. And it would. And hopefully we get to that. We get to that place sooner rather than later. But we shall see. We shall see.
We've got to pay you, Margaret. We've got to pay you.
That's right. That's right. You got to pay me for my labor.
That's right. Put it on your ex bio. Go on. Coffee.
True. I mean, Michelle, you and I already own the means of production to Verity La. So.
We do. We're actually an enemy.
So we're doing well. We're doing well.
I think we've got $90 in the bank account, Margaret.
Oh God.
Okay. See you later.
See you.
See everybody. Bye.